A warm welcome from Art and myself. There's quite a lot happening at Riley Park Community Garden already in the third week of June. This time of year, or this month, is actually called January. We're benefiting from the longer stretches or longer days of sunlight, the slightly cooler temperatures, and lots of useful rains.
Before we get into what's happening here in the garden, we'd like to recognize that we're standing on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, who have likely been on this site for maybe up as much as 10,000 years, and we really appreciate the opportunity to live and garden on Salish territory.
As we mentioned in our first video, broad beans or fava beans are cool weather crops and were planted last fall. You can also plant them in early spring, and they will take about 4 months to mature. Now, when we first looked at the broad beans, those light, pale white clusters of flowers were vibrant, but now they're starting to fade and they're being replaced by tiny fruit or green pods that are the broad beans. These plants aren't quite ready to harvest yet, but you can look and determine at the pods when they're ready by drooping pods or pods that are starting to swell. And you should be able to feel the firmness of the pod and the broad beans inside, and that's when you know when they're ready to harvest. And to harvest, you can just gently pinch the pod off the plant.
Okay, Charlene, we have a pretty healthy broad bean crop here, but we do have a pest problem that is one that's an ongoing one, and a very interesting one. Do you want to give us a little bit of lowdown on that?
Broad beans are prone to pest damage from aphids, also known as black flies, that feed on the top tender shoots of the plants. Now, there are a few ways to control this damage or minimize this damage. First, you can take pruners and just prune off the top tender shoots where the aphids are feeding, or prune off or remove the areas of the pods that might be susceptible to some damage, like on this plant here. The other thing is you can use a hose, because aphids are sapsuckers and they're soft-bodied creatures. So you can use a sharp blast of water and a hose and just spray off the aphids, which will knock them down to the ground. And then the other thing is encourage beneficial insects like lady beetles or bugs that will eat the aphids and be your own natural biological control. But the other thing to note is to be constantly vigilant and check your plants as regularly as possible to minimize pest damage. Well, that's a wrap on this week's video. And remember, if you'd like more resources on gardening, or if you have questions that you'd like to ask us, we have a panel of master gardeners and student master gardeners and a few garden experts that are taking questions. So please visit the Riley Park Community Garden website and click on Garden Guides and fill out our 4-question survey and submit your questions.
If you're actually in Riley Park, we would encourage you to come and enjoy the diversity of plants in the garden and observe the different vegetables and fruit crops that are ripening as we speak. We are trying to be a little bit cautious, so please follow the COVID-19 social distancing guidelines, and if there are gardeners working in the garden, we would appreciate if you stayed out on the perimeter of the garden.
From both Art and myself, until we see you next week in the garden, have a great week.